Every red pill is a recognition that some piece of conventional wisdom is false, but some of the falsehoods that plague the modern West are easier to recognize than others. Equality, for instance, simply does not exist, and it does not take much politically incorrect noticing to realize this. Multiculturalism is so objectively damaging to society that people only support it so long as its effects are hidden from them by the media. Other lies, however, are more subtly dangerous. Democracy has a long history in the United States and was at one time an inspiration to patriots and statesmen. Over time, the association between democracy and America became so strong that at present calling something democratic is just another way of calling it good. The ideal of democracy served America well when the country was a homogeneous nation, living consciously within the European tradition. But the democratic conviction that citizens should be treated equally under the law weakened as more diversity, and therefore more de facto inequality, was introduced to the country. In practical terms, democracy today means the tyranny of the majority, which in many places devolves into hysterical, irrational mob rule. Politicians still employ rhetoric about our democratic way of life and our democratic institutions, in the hope that nostalgic voters will happily imagine the Norman Rockwell world, the America that no longer exists, rather than angrily demand solutions for the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riders who rule our streets. The funny thing is, when a politician flatters voters by telling them how important they are, he knows that each individual voter has basically no power. Electoral power is divided among all voters, so the more democratic the country becomes, the less power any one citizen can wield. Politicians love democracy because the burden of organizing for political action rests on the citizens who are least likely to have the time or inclination to be effective. It does not matter if you call your representative to complain. He does not have to respond until thousands call. If every citizen has an equal say in politics, then no one has a voice loud enough to be heard. This sort of unfettered democracy has subtle hints of Soviet-style collectivism about it, so conservatives are suspicious enough to occasionally criticize it. Handing out power based on electoral victory is a perverse incentive that encourages politicians to turn their energy away from public service and toward campaigning and electoral tricks. The greatest trick of all is convincing citizens to dilute what little power they have by bringing in more voters. This is basic supply and demand. The more votes in the country, the less each vote is worth. The American political class has been slowly electing a new people through mass immigration and intentionally favoring the less intelligent and less politically sophisticated from the Third World to build an easily controlled populace. Mass immigration is the direct result of democracy. The American people do not want more immigration, but it continues because migrants solve the problem of democracy for politicians. The left is open about their intention to displace white Americans, but few people realize that the GOP is no better than the left. Occasionally, a clever Republican will acknowledge the left's plan for immigration, while promising that the GOP can outwit the Democrats by appealing to naturally conservative Hispanics. Do you see the trap laid out in plain sight? The GOP, no less than the East Germans and the Democrats, were willing to elect a new people. Think of the brazenness of it. A so-called conservative comes before the people who elected him, then proudly declares that he would rather import truckloads of new constituents rather than conserve the jobs, communities, and the very existence of the citizens who put him into office. The democracy red pill is hard to accept because it reveals how alone the American people really are. The people and institutions we trusted to protect our interests not only betrayed us, they did so by means of the very principle that is supposed to give people power. There is a silver lining, however. Other red pills merely change our perspective, but immediate political steps can alter democracy to reduce the perverse incentives that distract politicians from their constituents. Voting must be made more difficult, so only the most motivated, informed, and proactive citizens will actually show up. Eligible citizens should have to fill out a voter registration form months in advance, present multiple forms of ID at the polling station, and only vote on election day. Early voting, automatic registration, and other conveniences disproportionately favor the least responsible citizens and encourage fraud. New citizens should only receive voting privileges slowly. After earning citizenship, an immigrant should be required to wait 5 years before voting in any local election. 10 years for state, 15 years for national. This would create a disincentive for pandering to migrants and shift political energy back towards fulfilling the wishes of the historic American nation. There are many other aspects of domestic policy that work in tandem with democracy against the interests of the American people. It is unlikely, however, that any changes to the democratic process will reverse the demographic shift that has been put in place. As more and more ethnic Europeans become disillusioned with the democratic process, the right-wing conservative movement will only gain more adherents, which, at some point in the future, will build our people an army in the dark.